Some people come into this world and wonder, why was I born into so much pain? They look around at their family, the very people meant to nurture, protect, and love them, and instead find judgment, criticism, chaos, or abandonment. It's easy to believe that something must be wrong with them, that they must have done something to deserve it. But what if I told you that the strongest souls often choose the hardest beginnings, not as a punishment, but as a mission, a calling? You see, before we come into this life, there's a belief in many spiritual traditions that our souls make certain choices. Not random, not accidental, choices with purpose, choices that shape the journey we're meant to take. This concept is sometimes called a soul contract. It's the idea that before we are born, our soul agrees to experience certain challenges, to meet certain people, yes, even the toxic ones, not for suffering's sake, but for transformation. A strong soul doesn't come into an easy life. It comes into the fire, knowing that the fire is what will awaken its power. A toxic family environment, as brutal as it feels, becomes the spiritual gym where the soul develops its strength. It's the crucible where empathy is born, where courage is tested, and where truth starts to matter more than approval. In the chaos, you start to question, you start to observe, you begin to see the cracks in the masks people wear. And while it hurts, it really deeply hurts. That pain has a strange way of pulling something out of you. Something ancient, something powerful. That pain forces you to dig deep into yourself, to find something no one else ever showed you, your own light. When a soul chooses a toxic family, it's not because it enjoys pain. It's because it understands what that pain will produce. It knows that in that environment, the soul will have the chance to rise, to become, to remember. Strong souls don't seek comfort. They seek clarity. And sometimes clarity comes through contrast. When you've never been loved the way you needed, you learn what real love should feel like. When your voice has been silenced, you begin to understand the value of speaking your truth. When you've been ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood, you develop a deeper sensitivity to others, a radar for authenticity, a hunger for something real. And while many might look at their trauma and ask, "Why me?" the strong soul eventually begins to ask, "What can I become because of this?" That shift doesn't happen overnight. It might take years, even decades, but it starts with the realization that maybe, just maybe, you didn't end up in that family by accident. Maybe you were placed there because only a soul like yours could survive it, could break the cycle, could turn pain into wisdom and wounds into a source of healing, not just for yourself, but for others who have walked the same dark path. The truth is, your soul knew. It saw the fire and still chose to enter, because deep down it remembered that fire doesn't just burn, it forges. At some point, most people who grew up in toxic environments ask themselves the same quiet question: why did it have to be this hard? It's not just the yelling or the silence, the control or the neglect. It's the weight of never feeling safe, never feeling truly seen. And while it's painful to admit, what many don't realize is that trauma, though brutal, can become the spark that ignites awakening. It becomes the breaking point that opens the door to something far more powerful, consciousness. When you grow up in a toxic family, you live in a state of hyper-awareness. You notice shifts in tone, facial expressions, energy. You learn to read the room like your survival depends on it, because it does. This constant emotional vigilance may start as protection, but over time it becomes something more. It becomes insight, it becomes intuition, it becomes the root of self-awareness. You begin to watch not just others, but yourself. Your reactions, your feelings, your beliefs. You start questioning everything you were taught to accept as truth. That moment of questioning is the seed of awakening. Trauma has a strange way of doing that. It shatters the illusion of safety, the illusion of control, and sometimes even the illusion of love. But in that collapse, it also shatters the false self, the mask you had to wear just to survive. And underneath that mask is someone raw, real, and waiting to be remembered. Someone powerful, the moment you realize that the pain you've been carrying isn't your identity, but a message. That's when things begin to change. That's when the numbness starts to fade. That's when you begin to feel not just hurt, but alive. Most people live their entire lives asleep. They follow patterns, they chase approval, they stay in comfort zones. But those who have been cracked open by trauma don't have that option. Pain wakes you up. It demands answers. It forces you to look deeper, beneath the surface, beneath the stories, beneath the conditioning. It makes you ask the hardest questions. Who am I without their approval? What do I really believe? What do I deserve? And most importantly, what do I need to heal? You start walking a different path, not the easy one, but the real one. You stop chasing validation and start chasing truth. You stop numbing and start feeling. You stop performing and start transforming. It's not pretty. It's messy and lonely and terrifying, but it's real, and real is what your soul came here for. There's a moment in every awakened soul's journey when they realize the trauma wasn't just about suffering. It was a doorway into consciousness, into awareness, into remembering who you were before the world tried to break you. Without the trauma, you may have stayed asleep. You may have continued playing roles that didn't belong to you. But because of it, you began to wake up. You began to notice the patterns. You began to question the lies. And eventually, you began to choose something different. Healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about awakening what's been buried. Trauma might have cracked your foundation, but it also made space for a new one. One you build with intention, truth, and love. A foundation that comes from within, not from anyone else's permission or approval. So yes, the pain was real. But so is the power it revealed. When you grow up in a toxic family, love often comes with conditions. You learn early on that being yourself isn't always safe, that your emotions are too much, your silence is too loud, your truth too inconvenient. You're taught, sometimes without words, that your worth depends on how well you can shrink, mold, or perform. And in that space where emotional safety is constantly threatened, something else begins to develop, something deep, something invisible, and something most people never understand unless they've lived it. You begin to feel everything. You begin to sense what others won't say. You begin to read people not just through their words, but through the energy they carry. This isn't accidental. This is the beginning of an extraordinary gift: empathy. The ability to step into someone else's world and feel it as if it were your own. It doesn't come from peace. It's forged in emotional survival. When you've been raised by those who lie with smiles, who wound with silence, who shift blame while playing the victim, you develop a radar for what's real and what's not. You learn to pick up on tone changes, on energy shifts, on the pauses between words, not because you're paranoid, but because you had to. That sensitivity, once used to protect yourself, evolves into one of your greatest strengths. You see, while others may only hear what's said, you've learned to hear what's hidden. While others take people at face value, you see the layers beneath the mask. It can feel like a curse, being this aware, this open, this raw in a world that often rewards numbness. But, in truth, it's a rare kind of power. Because empathy, when healed and refined, doesn't just make you feel deeply. It allows you to connect deeply, to understand others with a kind of clarity that goes far beyond logic. Growing up in toxicity also sharpens your intuition. It teaches you to listen to that quiet inner voice, the one that tugs at your gut even when everything on the surface seems fine. Maybe you ignored that voice in your childhood because you were gaslighted or shamed for feeling too much. But that voice is part of you. It's the part that always knew when something wasn't right, even when everyone around you insisted it was. And now, as you grow, that voice becomes your compass. It leads you away from manipulation and toward authenticity. Away from people who drain you, and toward those who nourish your soul. What's incredible is that the very thing you thought was your weakness, your sensitivity, your depth, your emotional intensity, is actually your superpower. You were never broken. You were becoming. You were learning the language of energy, the map of human emotion, the patterns of pain and healing. And now, as you begin to heal, you realize you don't just understand your story. You understand everyone's story. You can walk into a room and feel what's not being said. You can sense the weight someone's carrying just by looking in their eyes. That's not softness. That's mastery. The world needs more of that. More people who can sit with pain without trying to fix it, who can see past the mask and still choose compassion, who can love with depth because they've lived through the opposite. And that's you. That's what your journey through dysfunction has given you. You didn't just survive your family, you developed emotional X-ray vision. There comes a moment in every strong soul's life when they realize they were never meant to fit in. They were meant to change everything. If you grew up in a toxic family, you probably spent years asking yourself what was wrong with you. Why you were always the black sheep, the misunderstood one, the target for blame or silence. You tried to please, to blend in, to keep the peace. But no matter how hard you tried, something in you refused to stay quiet. Something in you kept waking up, kept seeing through the dysfunction, kept asking, why is no one talking about this? That something is your calling. Because what many people don't realize is that strong souls are often born into toxic families, not to continue the cycle, but to break it. To be the first to feel the pain and not run from it, the first to name the truth and not back down, the first to say, this stops with me, and make no mistake, that's not a small task. It's one of the hardest missions a soul can choose. When you're born into generations of unhealed trauma, it lives in the air around you, in the silence, in the way love is withheld or weaponized, in the way no one ever apologizes and no one ever changes. You inherit pain that didn't start with you, but it lives inside you until you decide to face it. And when you do, you start waking up to patterns. You start connecting dots. You begin to realize that this isn't just about your parents or your siblings. It goes deeper. It's ancestral, generational, and somehow you've been chosen to carry the torch through the dark. Being a cycle breaker is lonely. You'll be misunderstood. You'll be told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too different. You'll question yourself 1,000 times. But deep down, you'll know the truth. You'll know that your soul didn't come here to play small or stay silent. It came here to transform what has been repeated for far too long. You're the awakener, the pattern disruptor, the one who looks around and says, this isn't love. This is survival disguised as connection. And I choose to love differently. And that decision, to love differently, to live differently, is where the healing begins. You start to grieve what you never had. You begin to parent yourself. You create boundaries where there were none. You learn what real respect feels like. You speak truth even when your voice shakes, and in doing so, you don't just heal yourself. You shift the entire frequency of your lineage. You begin to understand that your pain had a purpose, that your isolation had meaning. That the battles you fought behind closed doors were not in vain. They were setting the foundation for something better. for your children, for your relationships, for your legacy. You're not just healing your own wounds. You're healing the wounds of those who came before you and creating a new path for those who will come after. This work is sacred, and it's not for the faint of heart, but if you're doing it, if you're in the middle of it, know this, you're not broken. You're the breakthrough. You weren't placed in that family to be like them. You were placed there to rise beyond them, and in doing so, become the light they never knew they needed. You're not cursed. You're chosen to end the curse. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from romantic love. It comes from your own blood. From realizing that the people who were supposed to protect you, guide you, lift you up, were the ones who made you feel invisible, unwanted, or not enough. That kind of pain doesn't just bruise the heart, it shatters the foundation of identity. When your own family treats you like an outsider, like the problem, the scapegoat, the burden, it's easy to believe that you are unlovable. That, maybe, you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much, or not enough of something they wanted. But here's what most people don't understand: being rejected by a toxic family doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're different, and in toxic systems, difference is dangerous, because your presence alone calls out the unspoken. Your truth disturbs the silence. Your light exposes the shadows they've spent years hiding in. So instead of embracing you, they isolate you. Instead of listening, they invalidate. And instead of loving you, they try to reshape you. It hurts. It hurts more than words can say. But eventually, something starts to shift. After the years of trying to earn their love, after the countless attempts to explain yourself, to be enough for them, you begin to realize that their approval is not the prize. Your freedom is. Their validation was never going to heal you, because healing doesn't come from getting the ones who hurt you to love you. It comes from learning how to love yourself in the aftermath of that hurt, and that journey toward self-love is the most powerful journey a soul can take. Because when the people who were supposed to teach you your worth failed to do so, you were forced to find that worth inside yourself. You had to build it slowly and painfully from the ground up. You had to look at yourself without their voices echoing in your head. You had to ask, who am I really? Not the version they projected onto me, not the role they forced me to play, but the real me. And that version of you, that's the one who's been waiting all along, the one who knows that peace matters more than approval, the one who no longer begs for love but creates it within, the one who understands that walking away isn't weakness, it's strength. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. That choosing yourself doesn't make you cruel, it makes you free. Isolation has a strange way of becoming sacred. When you're pushed out, left out, or cast aside, you're also pushed inward. And there, in the quiet, something powerful starts to grow. Your voice, your truth, your self-respect. You learn to stop begging for crumbs and start building your own table. You learn to stop explaining your pain and start honoring it. You learn that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by safety, respect, and love. Sometimes, the deepest love you'll ever find is the love you give yourself when no one else did. And one day, without realizing it, you'll look back and thank the silence for forcing you to speak. You'll thank the rejection for guiding you home to yourself. And you'll understand that being cast out was never the end of your story. It was the beginning of your awakening. The family's rejection wasn't your end. It was your initiation. There's something incredibly powerful about reaching a point in your life where you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What am I here to do with it?" That shift doesn't come easily. It usually arrives after years of pain, confusion, and inner work. But when it comes, it changes everything. Suddenly, your trauma isn't just a scar. It's a message, a guidepost, a key to something greater than survival. It becomes the foundation of purpose. When you're born into a toxic family, it's easy to feel like your life was a mistake, that you were just trying to make it through, trying to stay unseen or untouched by the chaos around you. But strong souls don't just survive, they transform. And through that transformation, something sacred begins to emerge. A mission, a calling, not one written in the stars or handed to you by anyone else, but one that rises up from the very center of your healing. You begin to realize that your experiences gave you a kind of knowledge you could never have read in a book. You know how it feels to be abandoned. You know how it feels to be silenced, ignored, misunderstood. And because of that, you know how to hold space for others who are going through their own darkness. You become the person you always needed, the one who doesn't flinch when someone cries, the one who understands without needing everything to be explained, the one who speaks truth when silence would be easier. That's not just healing, that's purpose. That's what makes your story bigger than you. Because when you've done the work to heal yourself, you become a mirror for others. You become a lighthouse. And lighthouses aren't loud, they just stand strong, shining through the storm so others can find their way. Maybe your purpose is to create, to write, to speak, to make art that expresses everything you once had to bury. Maybe your purpose is to teach, to guide others through the maze you once walked alone. Or maybe your purpose is simply to live fully and freely, breaking every generational chain in the process. Whatever form it takes, it's real, and it's rooted in your story. Even your pain becomes part of your power. Because you can walk into rooms where others are hiding their hurt and say, "I've been there, I get it," and that alone can change someone's life. People don't always need advice, they need someone who gets it. And your journey through trauma, through healing, through awakening, makes you that someone. It's important to understand that your purpose isn't about being perfect, it's about being real, being human. Showing up with your scars and your wisdom and your truth. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be willing to keep growing, to keep choosing love, to keep turning pain into compassion. In the end, what once looked like a curse begins to feel like a calling, not because the pain didn't happen, but because you chose to do something meaningful with it. You chose not to let it define you. You chose to alchemize it into something that could uplift others. That choice is everything. You didn't just survive for yourself, you survived so you could help light the way for others still trapped in the dark.